We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Ches Amud Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 28a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing a contradiction between two brises with regards to the 7 sprinklings of blood of the Para Aduma. Both brises agreed that if those sprinklings are done Shelo Lishman, if they're done not for their sake, so that's a disqualification because Para Aduma is considered like a carbon chatas. A carbon chatas Shelo Lishma is Pesula, is disqualified. But there was a contradiction between the two brises in a situation of Shelo Mechuvanos. Let's say the sprinklings are not done precisely towards the entrance of the Oel Moed. The first brisa said puzzle in that situation. The second brisa said kosher. And the Gemara now is presenting an answer by Rava. Rava says the answer to the contradiction is Hadekoi Mizrachu Ma'irav. The brisa which says Kesheros is talking where the Kohen is facing east-west. Va'adi, and he sprinkles in that fashion. Hadekoi Tzafon V'darim. But the brisa which says disqualified is he standing north-south V'adi, and he sprinkles the blood. And Rashi explains Hadekoi Kohen Mizrach Umayrav V'adi. If the Kohen is standing east-west, meaning V'im Amar Kohen B'fanav L'mayrav. If the Kohen is standing and he's facing west, V'achorav L'mizrach, and his back is to the east, V'hiz, and he sprinkles Shekach Mitzvaso, that's the proper way. Afilu Einam Mechuvanos Keneged HaPesach, even if he's not precisely sprinkling towards the entrance of the Oel Moed, Ksheros, it is still going to be kosher. V'hadatani Psulos, and the Brisa which says it's disqualified, Tekoit Safon V'darim, he's facing entirely the wrong direction, north or south, Shalokim Mitzvaso, not according to the proper mitzvah V'adi, and he sprinkles in that fashion, and then it is problematic. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, quoting from the Brisa above, V'shebifnim, by the sprinklings of the inner chatos, V'shebimitzora, and by the oil, this is talking about the oil of mitzora during the purification process, that is also sprinkled, Shalo Lishman Psulos, if it's not done Lishman, not for their sake, it's disqualified, Shalo Mechuvanos Ksheros, if it's not precisely in the right direction, towards the Kodesh Kadashim, it is still kosher. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'atanya, but we learned in a Brisa, this is regarding the shemen of the mitzora, Bein Shalo Lishman, Bein Shalo Mechuvanos, whether it's Shalo Lishman, whether it's Shalo Mechuvanos Ksheros, it's kosher, and so that's a contradiction within Shalo Lishman. In the first Brisa it says Shalo Lishman is psulos by the oil of the mitzora, and in the second Brisa it says Shalo Lishman is Ksheros. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Yosef says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Ha Rabbi Eliezer v'ha Rabbanon. One Brisa is following Rabbi Eliezer, and one Brisa is following the Rabbanon. Rabbi Eliezer demakish osham lechatas. Rabbi Eliezer compares carbon osham to carbon chatas and says that there's a disqualification by osham as well when it's shalo lishma. So makish nami lug la'osham. He also compares the lug of oil by mitzora to osham, and therefore there's a disqualification if it's shalo lishman. But Rabbanon lo makshi, the Rabbanon don't make that comparison by carbon osham, and therefore by the lug of oil as well, there's no disqualification. But the Gemara asks, Ula Rabbi Eliezer, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, v'chidavar halamid behekesh chozer malamid behekesh, even if there is a hekesh that teaches to carbon osham, can something learned from a hekesh teach through a hekesh? Can we do a double hekesh and then learn to the log shemen as well? We can't do that in general by kodshim. And so the Gemara continues, Elo amar Rava, rather Rava says, Hava ha-Rabbanon, both brises are actually following the Rabbanon, and again the Rabbanon don't make the comparison in terms of carbon osham, but the brises are just discussing separate ideas. Kan lahachshir, in one case the brisa is just talking about rendering fit, and kan lahartzos in the other brisa it's talking about acceptance. What that means to say is that the sprinklings, if they're done shalo lishman, it is still going to render everything fit, as we'll see in Rashi in a moment, but that does not mean that it's going to fulfill the obligation of the owners. It's still going to be puzzle in that regard. And Rashi explains, V'atanya ben shalo lishman ksheros ad mitzora koy. Again, the brisa that we're asking from is talking about the oil by the mitzora. Rabbi Eliezer demakish osham lechatos. Rabbi Eliezer compares osham to chatos. V'afilu osham de mitzora pasal shalo lishma. Therefore, even the osham of a mitzora is disqualified shalo lishma. But then the Gemara asked, V'chi osham halamid behekesh mechatos. Can osham, which is learned, it's derived from a hekesh through chatos, to have a pasal shalo lishmo, that it's disqualified shalo lishmo? Chozer u'malamid behekesh al halug. Can that teach about the lug shemen by the mitzora to have a pasal that should be disqualified shalo lishmo if it's shalo lishmo? V'akaimalan beperak ezim mekomon. But we've established in perak ezim mekomon and Meseches v'achim de'in lamedin lamad min halamad b'kodshim. You can't have a double derivation when it comes to kodshim. And Rashi continues, hekesh techatos v'yosham. Where's the hekesh of chatos and osham? Dechsiv kachatos ka'osham torachas lem. That's what it says in the pasuk. Kachatos ka'osham, etc. V'kayolef Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer learns out machatos shelo lishma psula, just like chatas is disqualified shelo lishma. Da'afilu rabbanon mo do that, even the rabbanon agree to. Af asham nami pasul, so too asham is disqualified. And Rashi continues, hekesh da asham mitzora velugo, the comparison between the asham of a mitzora and the lug shemen of a mitzora. The chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, keves asham letenufa sefer dekrav lug shemen. Again, it mentions both in the pasuk. And then the Gemara said we make a distinction between lahachshir and lahartzos, and Rashi explains laratzos, lahazos, lalos, l'shem chova. When we say lahartzos, what that means is that it's going to fulfill the obligation of the owner, ulahatr mitzora b'kol, which will then permit the mitzora to enter the community. Pasul, there it's disqualified, shelo lishman. There, if it's done shelo lishman, it will not permit the mitzora to enter the kohol. V'hadatani kasheros, and the brisa which says kosher lahachshir, that just means to render fit. The hazaos of kasheros lahachshir shiyore halug ba'achila. What that means is that the sprinklings of the oil are kosher, and they allow the remainder of the lug of oil to be eaten. The shiyore lug mitzora nachalin, because the remainder of the lug of oil of the mitzora is eaten. Kedamrin perak elu menachos, like we say in perak elu menachos. V'zeya l'chami kodesh hakadoshim min ha'esh l'chol karbonam l'rabos log shemen shel mitzora. That includes the log shemen shel mitzora that is eaten. Uchsib basrei ba'kodesh hakadoshim tochlenu. It says after that, it says it's eaten in the kodesh kadoshim. Beparshas vayikach korach. That's in Parshas Korach. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Shiva Kanei Menorah, the 7 branches of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, Ma'akvin Zeh, those are required for one another. They are all required. Shiva Nei Roseh, the 7 lamps of the menorah, there was 1 lamp on top of each branch. Ma'akvin Zeh, those are required for one another. Shtei Parshios Sheba Mezuzah, the 2 Parshios in the Mezuzah, Ma'akvos Zuazu, those are required for one another. Afilu Ksav Echad Ma'akvan, even 1 letter that is missing or that has a mistake is a requirement that would create a disqualification. Dalid Parshios Shebet Tefillin Ma'akvin Zuazu, the 4 Parshios in Tefillin are required for one another. Afilu Ksav Echad Ma'akvan, again, even 1 letter with a mistake, that is a requirement for every letter to be proper, and therefore that would be a disqualification. Dalid et Tzitzios Ma'akvos Zuazu, the 4 tzitzis are ma'akiv one another. Let's say there's a garment with just tzitzis on 3 sides, that would be problematic. Shar Bos on mitzvah achas, because they're all 1 mitzvah. The 4 of them contain, or they combine to make 1 mitzvah. Rabbi Yishmael says our Bos on arba mitzvahs. Actually, the 4 are 4 separate mitzvahs, and therefore they are not ma'akiv one another. And Rashi explains, Shiva Kanei Menorah, the 7 branches of the menorah, Kedechsiv V'shisha Kanim Yotzim Mitzideh, it says there are 6 branches that come out. There's a middle branch, and then 3 on each side come out. That's a total of 7. V'ha-menorah atzma shebe'emtza hi hashviyas kazeh. And again, the menorah, the branch, so to speak, in the middle, the stem, that is the 7th. So you have the middle part of the menorah, and then you have 6 branches coming out. That's considered a total of 7 branches. And then Shiva Nei Roseh, there were 7 lamps. That means Barosh shall kana v'kana haya ner echad. At the top of each branch there was a ner, there was a lamp. Ke'ein bazach v'sham nosan hashemen v'apsilos. It was like a small bowl where they had the oil and the wick. Shtei parshios sheba mezuzah, the 2 parshios in the mezuzah. Shema v'haya im shemoah, that refers to the parsha of Shema, and the parsha of v'haya im shemoah. Ksav echad means os achas ma'akvin zuazu. It means even 1 letter. Dechsivu chsavtem kesivatam. It has to be a whole writing ushlema and complete. Uv'tfilin ksiv havaya. By tefillin it says the word havaya, that it has to be in its state, v'hayu letotafos, because it says v'hayu letotafos, and therefore we say that it is a requirement. Havaya means being or status quo. And Rashi continues, Dalid parshios shebet tefillin, the 4 parshios in the tefillin, Shema v'hayim shamoa, Kadesh li kol bechor v'haya ki yaviacha, those are the 4 parshios in tefillin. Shebetzida, the parsha v'haya ki yaviacha is next to Kadesh li kol bechor. Devekulu ksiv uletotafos, by all of these parshios it says uletotafos, ulezikaron beinei necha, or it says lezikaron beinei necha, meaning to say it mentions tefillin, and that's why these are the parshios that are in tefillin. And the Gemara continues, my time, and what is the reason? Havoya ksiv bahu, it says the word havoya, and Rashi explains, havoya ksiv bahu, again it says havoya being, status quo, it means to say kaftoreya muknosa mimeno yiyu, it says the word yiyu over there, and so therefore we understand that the 7 branches of the menorah are all requirements. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the sages taught in the Brisa, menorah haisa ba min ha'eshes umin hazav. The menorah comes min ha'eshes, that means it's 1 block, it's not made from separate components, and min hazav, it is made from gold. Asa min hagrutos, if it is made of scraps of gold, pesula, then it is disqualified. But mishar mine matachos, but if it's made from other metals, keshera, then it is kosher. And Rashi explains, min ha'eshes, it means asiyasa chaticha shleim, it's made from one cut of gold. Umaka b'kornis, he takes a solid block of gold and he bangs it with a hammer, at sheyetzu mimenu kol keileh, until he's able to make the proper form of the menorah out of that one solid block. And min ha'grutos is essentially the opposite of min ha'eshes. It means it's made from attaching different pieces of gold. Zahav shavar, you have broken gold and you attach it in order to make the menorah. That is problematic if it is made out of gold. And as we will see, the requirement of min ha'eshes, that it is made from one solid block, that is only if it's made out of gold. But if it's made out of other metals, so then there's no requirement that it's one solid block. Then it can be made from different components that are put together. And the Gemara continues and asks, Ma'ishna min hagrutos psula, what's the difference that min hagrutos, if it's made from different components, it's disqualified? Dechsiv miksha, it's written miksha, that's one solid block. V'havoya, and it says being, it says status quo, which indicates a requirement. Shar mine matchos nami, when it comes to other kinds of metals as well, zohav v'havoya, amar kro, it says gold and havoya, and so therefore maybe it has to be gold. Maybe it can't be from other metals. And the Gemara says to that, teyasa, the pasuk also says teyasa, and that's l'rabos shar mine matchos. That comes to include other kinds of metals, and therefore it's not restricted only to gold. The Gemara continues and asks, ve'emel l'rabos grutos, well, why don't we say teyasa? If it's an inclusion, maybe it includes different components, and maybe it must be made out of gold, but different components of gold put together would be okay. And the Gemara says, lo salka daitach, don't let that enter your mind. Miksha ksiva havoya. The word havoya is written on the word miksha. It's going on the idea that it has to be from a solid block. But the Gemara continues, Teyasa nami on miksha ksib, but Teyasa, which is an inclusion, that's also written on miksha. And the Gemara says to that, miksha liakiv, it says miksha twice, that means it is a requirement. But the Gemara continues, zahav nami lakiv, it says zahav twice, that also should indicate a requirement. And so the Gemara finally says, Hi mai, how can you go any other direction? Yamrit b'shaloma min hagrutos psul. If you're going to say correctly that min hagrutos, made from different components when it's made out of gold, is disqualified, but mishar mine matachos kshera, but other metals are kosher. So hainu zav miksha lidrasha. Then we can account for all the various times it says zav and all the various times it says miksha in terms of our drasha. Elo yamrit min hagrutos kshera. But if you're going to say that from different components, let's say it's made out of gold, but different components would be kosher, but mishar mine matchos psula, but other kinds of metals are disqualified and it must be gold, so then zav miksha, when it comes to accounting for all the various words, zav miksha, my darashta beid, how are you going to make this drasha? How can you account for the drasha? As the Gemara will now go on to explain. And Rashi explains, miksha mashma chaticha achas. Again, miksha is understood to mean chaticha achas. It's made from one solid block. Mishar matchos nami, from other metals also. Tifsol, that should be a disqualification. Maybe it has to be gold. Ta'ksiv zahav tar, it says gold. Uksiv havoya la'akev, and it says havoya, which indicates the requirement. And to that the Gemara said, Amar kro tayasa, the pasuk says tayasa, ha-menorah, the menorah is made, mashma tayasa mikol makom, it's understood to mean it can be made in any fashion. L'ravos shar matchos, and that comes to include other metals. Ve'emol l'ravos grutos, and so the Gemara asks, why don't we say that it includes grutos, meaning to say tayasa includes made of other components, dechsiv miksha, because it says miksha v'hader tayasa, and then it says tayasa mikol makom, and so therefore even other components, if it's made out of gold, is fine. And the Gemara then said, miksha ksiva havoya, the word havoya is going on miksha. Havoya smucha lemiksha yoser milazav. The word havoya is closer to the word miksha than zav, and therefore it indicates that the requirement is going on miksha. Umeshani, and then the Gemara answered, miksha ksiv, it says miksha twice. Trei zimni bevayichuli truma la'akev, it says two times in vayichuli truma in that parsha, and that indicates a requirement. V'kaparich zav nami trei zimni ksiv, and the Gemara asks, it also says zav twice. Ve'emel la'akev, maybe that's a requirement. And then Umeshani, then the Gemara answered, Hi mai, what are we saying over here? Iyamr b'shlama de grutos psulos ushar matchos ksheros. If you're going to say that components are disqualified but other metals are okay, ta'amrin on miksha devayichuli truma la'akev, that we say the two times it says miksha is a requirement. Hainu deitzrich zav devayichuli truma. Then it would make sense that it's necessary to have zav written twice in Parshas Truma. Umiksha devahaloscha ledrasha achrisi, and then the miksha that it says in Parshas Bahaloscha, a different parsha, that's for a different drasha. D'shaminon minon nami, because we understand from there also demishar mine matchos nami kashera. We understand from there also that other kinds of metals are kosher. Kedidarshinon lekamon. We're going to darshan that later on, and we will take a look at the Shita Mekubetzes over here, Lakamon, again later on, Nusach Achrina, another version, V'arba Miksha Ksivi, there are actually 4 times that it says Miksha, V'chamisha Zav Ksivi, it actually says Zav 5 times, Shnayim B'V'yichuli Truma, 2 times in Truma, Ushnayim B'Parshas Ba'aloscha, and then 2 times in Ba'aloscha, V'chi Amrinon Demin Hagrutos Psulos, and when we say that if it's made from different components, it is puzzle, have a trey Miksha, you have 2 times it says Miksha, Chad mitzvah v'chad la'akev. One is just to say a mitzvah l'chatchila, and one is to say it's a requirement again to be from one block. V'idach trei, and then the other 2 times that it says miksha l'drasha de l'kamon. That's for the drashas that are going to be later on. V'chi amrina nami demishar matchos kasher. And when we say that other metals are kosher, have echad zav legufa v'idach l'drasha de l'kamon. One time it says zav, that's for the pasuk itself. The other time is for the drasha that we will mention later on. And the Gemara continues, my drasha. What is the drasha that we are referring to? The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Kikar Zahav Tar Yasa Osa Eskal Akela Ma'ila. It says that the menorah is made from a Kikar Zahav Tar, that is a Kikar of pure gold, a talent of pure gold. And we learn from there, Ba'a Zav, that if it is made out of gold, Ba'a Kikar, then it has to be a Kikar, it has to be that amount, a talent. Eina Ba'a Zav, but if it is not made out of gold, Eina Ba'a Kikar, then that amount of a Kikar is not required to be that amount. Giviyah Kaftoreo Fracha, then it says it's goblets and it's knobs and it's flowers, and we learn from there, Ba'a Zav, again, if it's made out of gold, Ba'a Giviyim Kaftor Mufrachim, then the goblets and the knobs and the flowers are required. Eina Ba'a Zav, but if it's not made out of gold, Eina Ba'a Giviyim Kaftor Mufrachim, so then the goblets and the knobs and the flowers are not required. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ve'ema Nami, why don't we also say Ba'a Zav, that it's made out of gold, Ba'a Konim, then it has branches. Eina Ba'a Zav, but if it's not made out of gold, Eina Ba'a Konim, then it's not made out of branches. But the Gemara says that's impossible. Ahu Pamot Mikri, if it would just have that one branch in the middle, that's just called a candlestick. That's not a menorah at all. And the Brisa continues, the pasuk says, V'zeh Masa HaMenorah Miksha Zav. Again, it says Miksha Zav. And again, we learn Ba'a Zav, if it's made out of gold, Ba'a Miksha, then it's made from one solid unit of gold. It's not made from different components put together. Eina Ba'a Zav, but if it's not made out of gold, Eina Ba'a Miksha, so then the Miksha is not a requirement. And the Gemara continues and asks, Miksha de Seifa, the word Miksha at the end of the pasuk, when it says beaten, again out of one unit, when it says that at the end of the pasuk, Lamaya, so what is that coming for? That's Lemu'ute Chatzotzros, that's coming to exclude Chatzotzros, which are the trumpets. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Chatzotzros, Hayuboim min ha'eshes, Chatzotzros, they're made from one unit, min ha'kesef, from silver, but Asa min ha'grutos, if they're made from scraps, they're made from different components, Kesherim, then it is kosher, Mishar minei if it's made from other metals, psulim, then it's disqualified. And so we see from here that chatzotzros are different. Min hagrutos is going to be kosher when it comes to chatzotzros. And the Gemara continues and asks, U'ma'ishna mishar minei matchos psulim, what's the difference that when it comes to the chatzotzros, other metals are disqualified? Tichsiv kesef v'havoya, again it says silver and havoya, it says being, status quo, that indicates a requirement. So min hagrutos nami, when it comes to being made from different components, from scraps as well, miksha v'havoya, it says miksha and havoya, by the chatzosros as well, that should be a requirement. And the Gemara continues and answers, Mi'et Rachmana Gabi Menorah, again, like we just said above, by Menorah there's an exclusion, Mikshahi, because it says in the pasuk, Mikshahi, it is beaten, Hi velo chatzosros, that refers to it, and not the chatzosros, that's an exclusion of the chatzosros. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Brisa, Kol HaKelim, all of the vessels, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis.